I stood at the windows of my grandfather's study, watching rain streak down the glass of our century-old estate. The last will and testament of Harrison Blackwood II lay unopened on his mahogany desk behind me. At 32, I was about to discover exactly how far my family would go to protect their precious legacy. More importantly, I would finally reveal what my grandfather and I had planned for the past 3 years. Miss Victoria Andrews, our family butler who had served 3 generations of Blackwoods, appeared at the door. The family has assembled in the main library. I nodded, gathering both my composure and the envelope. Thank you, Andrews. I'll be there momentarily. Walking through Blackwood Manor's corridors felt like traversing time itself. Oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors watched my progress, their eyes seeming to judge whether I was worthy of the name I carried. I had spent the last decade proving myself in the corporate world, building my own successful investment firm far from the family's influence. Now, circumstances had drawn me back into the web of Blackwood politics. The library doors opened to a scene of barely concealed tension. My Uncle Richard, my father's younger brother, had deliberately chosen to sit in grandfather's favorite armchair. His wife Patricia perched beside him, her perfectly maintained appearance betraying no sign of their re-day flight from London. Their son Maxwell lounged against a bookshelf, his casual pose contrasting with the sharp attention in his eyes. Across the room, my father Harrison Blackwood IV sat rigidly in a leather wingback chair, my mother Eleanor beside him. The strain of the past month had left its mark on both of them. Well, Uncle Richard broke the silence. Shall we proceed with the reading? Some of us have businesses to return to. I moved to the center of the room, feeling the weight of expectations pressing down on me. Before I open this, there's something you should know. Grandfather asked me to serve as executor of his estate. The reaction was immediate. Richard's fingers tightened on the armrest, his knuckles whitening. That's absurd. I'm the family's attorney. I've handled all our legal matters for 30 years. Nevertheless, I replied calmly, it was his explicit wish. The paperwork was filed last month. I broke the seal on the envelope, the sound sharp in the tension-filled room. The document inside was surprisingly brief for a man who had built a billion-dollar empire. I, Harrison Blackwood II, I began reading, being of sound mind, declare this to be my last will and testament. The initial provisions were standard: charitable donations, provisions for long-term staff, specific bequests of personal items. Then came the core of the matter. The majority of my estate, including controlling interest in Blackwood Industries and all associated holdings, I leave to my granddaughter, Victoria Eleanor Blackwood. The silence that followed was deafening. I continued reading, keeping my voice steady despite the shock rippling through the room. She has demonstrated the qualities I consider essential for leading our family's legacy into the future: integrity, innovation, and the courage to stand apart from the crowd. To my son Harrison, I leave a 20% stake in the company and his current position as CEO, provided he works in good faith with Victoria. To my son Richard, I leave a 15% stake and the choice to continue as corporate counsel under the same provision. Uncle Richard surged to his feet. This is outrageous. She abandoned the family business years ago to play at being an entrepreneur. I've dedicated my life to Blackwood Industries. Exactly, I replied, holding up a second document. And grandfather knew exactly what that dedication entailed. I placed a thick folder on the coffee table. This contains detailed records of every questionable transaction you've orchestrated over the past 5 years, Uncle Richard. The offshore accounts, the manipulated contracts, the strategic losses that somehow enriched your personal holdings. I watched the color drain from his face. You're bluffing. Grandfather wasn't just testing your loyalty these past few years, I continued. He was building a case. He knew someone was bleeding the company, but he needed proof. So he created a perfect trap, appearing to decline mentally, seeming to lose his grip on the business. You took the bait. Maxwell pushed away from the bookshelf. You can't prove any of this. Actually, my father spoke for the first time. We can. Victoria brought this to my attention 3 months ago. We've been working with forensic accountants to document everything. I saw the shock ripple through the room at the revelation that my father had been working with me. Harrison Blackwood IV had always seemed to be under his brother's influence, deferring to Richard's expertise in all things financial. Why? Aunt Patricia's voice quavered. Why would Harrison do this to his own son? I opened another document. Because family legacy isn't just about blood, huh, Patricia? It's about trust, about integrity, about building something that lasts beyond personal gain. I began distributing copies of a detailed report. Grandfather spent his last years teaching me, testing me not through direct instruction, but by creating circumstances that would reveal everyone's true character. While you thought he was losing his grip, he was actually orchestrating the most important succession plan of his life. Uncle Richard snatched the report, his hands shaking as he read. This would destroy us if it got out. It doesn't have to, I replied. Grandfather left you a choice, Uncle Richard. You can accept the terms of the will, return every penny you've diverted, and continue serving the company under proper oversight. Or you can fight this, trigger a very public investigation, and watch everything you've built crumble. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked away precious seconds as Richard stared at the documentation of his crimes. Finally, he sank back into his chair, defeated. You're more like him than any of us realized. I thought about the long conversations I'd had with my grandfather in this very room, discussions that had seemed casual at the time but had actually been carefully crafted lessons. He taught me that true power isn't about control or manipulation. It's about responsibility, to the company, to our employees, to our legacy. Over the next several hours, lawyers were called, documents were signed, and the shape of Blackwood Industries' future began to emerge. I would assume control gradually, working with my father to ensure a smooth transition. Richard would remain as counsel, but under strict oversight. Maxwell, after a private conversation with me, agreed to enter a management training program, earning his place rather than expecting it. That evening, as the family dispersed to their respective corners of the manor, I returned to my grandfather's study. Andrews appeared with a decanter of the special reserve scotch my grandfather had always favored. He would be proud, Andrews said quietly, pouring 2 glasses. He always said you had his mother's spine of steel. I accepted the glass, surprised. Andrews had never joined in a drink before. You knew about his plan, didn't you? Mr. Blackwood confided in me that he was setting up a series of tests, yes. But the choices were all yours, Miss Victoria. You proved yourself not by passing his tests, but by staying true to your principles even when you didn't know you were being tested. I thought about the path that had led here. Leaving the family business to build my own company hadn't been an act of rebellion, as everyone had assumed, but a need to prove I could succeed on my own merits. Every success, every failure had taught me lessons that would now serve in leading Blackwood Industries. To the old guard, Andrews raised his glass, and the new beginning. The next months brought sweeping changes to Blackwood Industries. I introduced new technologies, streamlined operations, and expanded into emerging markets. Richard, chastened by the exposure of his schemes, became a surprisingly valuable ally once he understood that his position now depended on merit rather than manipulation. My father flourished in his role as CEO, free from his brother's influence and supported by my innovative strategies. Our partnership became the talk of the business world. The experienced chief executive and the fresh-thinking chairman working in perfect harmony. 1 year after the reading of the will, I sat in what had been my grandfather's office, now transformed into a modern command center while still retaining key pieces of its historic character. His portrait washed over me as I reviewed quarterly reports showing record profits and unprecedented growth. A knock at the door preceded Andrew's entrance. Miss Victoria, I found something while organizing your grandfather's personal effects that he wanted you to have when the time was right. He placed an old leather journal on my desk. Inside, I found entries dating back decades, documenting not just business decisions but the reasoning behind them. The final entry was dated just days before my grandfather's death. Victoria will find this when she's ready, when she's proven what I've always known. That leadership isn't inherited in the blood, but earned through character. The others see her independence as rebellion. I see it as the strength this family needs to survive another century. She'll face resistance, but she has what matters most. The courage to stand by her convictions and the wisdom to know that true power lies not in controlling others, but in empowering them to be their best selves. Tears pricked at my eyes as I read his words. He had seen my potential not despite my choices, but because of them. Every decision I'd made, from leaving the family business to building my own success, had been a step toward proving myself worthy of the legacy he envisioned. A message popped up on my computer. the announcement of Blackwood Industries' latest acquisition, a tech startup with revolutionary green energy technology. The stock price was soaring, but more importantly, the company was positioning itself to make a real difference in the world. My phone buzzed with a text from Maxwell. Just landed my first major client for the new sustainability division. Turns out earning something feels better than being handed it. I smiled, thinking of how far we'd all come. Richard had transformed from a secretive schemer into a valuable advisor. Maxwell had discovered his own path to success. My father had emerged from his brother's shadow to become the leader he was always meant to be. The rain had returned, drumming against the windows just as it had the day the will was read. But now it felt less like an omen and more like renewal. I stood walking to the window to watch the grounds of Blackwood Manor emerge from the mist. The estate had stood for over a century, but its true strength lay not in its granite foundations or iron gates. It lay in the principles that had guided 3 generations of Blackwoods, principles that would now guide us into a new era. Andrews appeared at my elbow with a fresh cup of coffee, my grandfather's special blend, which I'd acquired a taste for over the past year. "Your grandfather used to stand here," he said quietly, watching the rain and planning the future. He said the best leaders don't just think about the next quarter or the next year. They think about the next generation. I nodded, thinking about the changes I'd implemented, the foundations I'd strengthened, the bridges I'd rebuilt within my family. He taught me that legacy isn't about preserving the past. It's about building a future worthy of it. I returned to my desk, where another acquisition proposal awaited my review. The world was changing rapidly, and Blackwood Industries would change with it, guided by the principles my grandfather had instilled: integrity, innovation, and the courage to forge new paths. His portrait seemed to approve as I began reading, those painted eyes holding the same twinkle I remembered from our many conversations in this room. He had given me more than just a company. He had given me the chance to prove that true inheritance wasn't about bloodlines or birthrights, but about the values you chose to uphold and the legacy you chose to build. As the day drew to a close and the last of my staff headed home, I remained in my office, adding my own entry to my grandfather's journal. "Today marks 1 year since you entrusted me with our family's legacy. You taught me that true leadership isn't about wielding power, but about using it to empower others. Every decision I make honors that lesson, building not just a stronger company, but a stronger family. The others finally understand what you knew all along, that our greatest inheritance isn't the wealth or the property or even the company. It's the wisdom to know that real success comes not from what we take, but from what we give back to the world." I closed the journal, placing it in the desk drawer that had held it for 3 generations of Blackwood leaders. Outside, the rain had finally stopped and the setting sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the estate. A new day would dawn tomorrow, bringing with it new challenges and opportunities. But I was ready, armed with the lessons of the past and a vision for the future. The legacy of Harrison Blackwood II lived on, not in the buildings that bore his name or the fortune he had amassed, but in the principles he had instilled in me, principles that would guide Blackwood Industries into a future brighter than even he could have imagined.